All right. Can you guys hear me okay? Perfect. All right. So thank you all for coming. Sorry I was late, but the weather does what the weather does. I was just saying a minute ago, I've never been happy to be late before, but that means I'm here. So I'm going to run through a presentation here, and it plays into a lot of what I just heard from the workshop discussion. And we'll wrap up with a Q&A and just talk and see if anything in the presentation inspires any new ideas or questions or anything like that. And here we go. So I'm Brian Wright. I'm the principal of Town Planning and Urban Design Collaborative, and have a team of folks with me. Thankfully, Katie was here tonight and lives nearby, so she was actually not affected by the snow, and so she got you all kicked off. But we have a few more people who are on their way this evening, I hope, on later flights, and will be with us tomorrow, and we'll jump right in. But we've got planners and land use attorneys, graphic designer, all the people necessary to make this thing happen. So we are fortunate that we get to work all over the country. So we get to see a lot of things. Sometimes we get to see great ideas, and sometimes we get to see places that really have missed the mark. And so we can bring all those good and bad lessons to the places that we're working. But I came here from Franklin, Tennessee today. And but years ago, I was here working on an earlier version of zoning. And so that's what you see there. But we get to do this all around. We write zoning ordinances and comprehensive plans. We also work for developers as well. And so it kind of helps when we're going through a zoning ordinance that we're able to think about, okay, well, what is it that the community's looking for? What is it that the city's looking for? What is it that is going to be important to developers who are going to be implementing the vision that you have in your plans and zoning? So we always like to start with building on what you've done. Starting with the past, looking back and studying and understanding things that have come before, and seeing what you have left, and you have all your different historic districts and things. So we've been looking at those and understanding them. And we actually go and document and study. So all those years ago, this is one of the sheets that we did where we went and walked the streets and measured and looked at setbacks and building types and heights and all of those things. So we've been digging through our old work, as well as your comprehensive plan, your current zoning ordinance, all the other planning that you all have done, so that we can really start to make sure that we're not revisiting everything. Now, tonight, we probably asked you some of the questions that you talked about during the comprehensive plan process. So we kind of like to, just when we get in the room, it's nice to hear it directly from the community, since we weren't involved in those past efforts. But for those who don't know, the comprehensive plan, it's a long-range policy document focusing on the vision for the future, has guidance for growth and development, and action items that are contained within it. And so we really start to, it sets that path forward. And then in your plan, you have your vision statement, and talks about a thriving downtown, and looking at neighborhoods that are connected to businesses, and green space and all of those things. So it's a great vision statement. There's some goals in there as well. It talks about meeting the residents' needs and engaging the citizenry. So that's one thing to talk about. Obviously, this is a low percentage of the population of the city, right? And so for us to engage the citizenry, we need people to fill the seats. So one thing I will ask for your homework is to let people know this is going on, and carpool to the subsequent events. But what you saw in the workshop exercise is it doesn't take very many people to get to the same conclusions, right? It's about the same thing as that last table. About the same thing as last. I always tell people the number of people who participate in a process doesn't validate it or not. It makes you feel good that we've heard all, we haven't missed anything, but it's usually pretty rare that somebody comes up with a thought or an idea that no one else has thought of. And so as long as we have, I always say, as long as we have 10 people who didn't all ride together, we can probably figure it out. So we have more than that tonight, so that's good. What we're looking at is making sure we're consistent with the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan talks about these various things, but it also specifically mentions the idea of developing form-based codes. And that's what we're here to follow up on and work on that as well. So we've heard during our discussions with different folks that downtown is great. This is sort of the what we love slide. That new infill developments are well done. There's a hometown feel. We've heard that you have rising housing costs, and that should be on the next slide. But the idea of having more starter homes near downtown, there's a little bit, but having more of that, and then protecting against Atlanta's sprawl creeping this way. There we go, rising housing costs. That was the number one thing that we heard from people as something to be concerned about. Your traffic congestion is another one. Here 13 years later, we're still hearing about the housing conditions for renters. That was a hot topic back in the day, and it still is. People were worried about losing the small town character. And then also the new development sometimes seems cookie cutter, some of it. And we heard some of that in the workshop just a minute ago, I think. And then you have an aging population, so wanting to make sure people can age in place and not have to leave town just because you get to a certain age. And then there's that sprawl creeping. So what is zoning, which is what we're here to discuss, because a lot of times things will come up throughout a process like this, things that the zoning can't do, right? But it's still good to hear it because there are some things that even though we can't directly affect it with zoning, sort of tangentially we can get there. So the zoning is really implementing the vision of the comprehensive plan. It groups the land into different zones, right? That's what zoning. Contains rules about what you can build, but it doesn't make something have to be built, right? So a lot of times when we start talking about changing the zoning or updating zoning, people start worrying like, oh my gosh, if you change this color on the map, all of a sudden this is going to happen, or I'm going to have to do this with my property. And so that's one of the things we always try to make sure people understand that it's not that. It just allows people to do things. Now you have the ability to do something with your property if you choose to do so. So what is zoning? So zoning can give you a nice little charming place like this, but it can also give you this. And I don't think this is Atlanta, but a lot of people guess that it is when I showed this slide around the country. Is that Atlanta? There were laws and rules and regulations that gave them this. And that's sometimes challenging. We just heard a minute ago somebody talking about, well, we don't want to be like so-and-so. But if your rules are giving you that, then what else are you going to do? Most people, when you ask them, say something, I want to be like Mayberry. So we look at what is Mayberry, and this is the actual set for Mayberry on the right-hand side there. This is a little small town, right? It could be here, really. But this is what most people get. Unfortunately, this is not Mayberry. And, it's probably a fine place to live, and, it suits a lot of people. But most of the time, if you give somebody a choice, say, do you like this image or that image better? And this is, on the street in this image, it's not one that gets picked ever. As opposed to maybe one of your downtown neighborhood streets. But again, it's zoning causes it, right? So the zoning separates things by use typically. That was the way it went. So we had these shopping pods, and we had office pods, and we still do, what am I saying? School pod maybe. Residential can be even sub-podded. So here's single family pod, and here might be a multi-family pod. And then sometimes the two uses come near each other. So you've got a residential pod to the top and a shopping pod to the bottom. And we want to make sure that no one could possibly get from one to the other very easily. So we have buffers and fences and all of that. And the people who live in the neighborhood invariably cut through the fence so they can get to the shop. Because otherwise they're leaving their house or driving around. They're getting on the collector road here. And they are traffic, right? So when you get in your car, you are your neighbor's traffic. So each time you're like, oh man, this traffic is driving me crazy, they're saying the same thing in the next lane about you. So, but people don't often realize that the development pattern is the thing that creates traffic. Now, you all seem to have all been talking amongst yourselves already because you said it in the workshop many times about the benefits of connectivity. But some places we go, that's not common knowledge. So good job for being ahead of the curve. So things have changed a little bit. This was probably in the 80s maybe. It says why walk there on the bumper of that. And then you've got scenes like this, and people weren't quite worried about being neighborly. This is today. This is a real estate office called the Cool Space Locator, right? Well, unfortunately, in most cities and towns in America, these folks would be out of business, right? Because there is no cool space. But you all have some cool space, I hear, so that's good. And people are, as opposed to the topiary guy, this is more what people are looking for these days. They want to get, not everyone, mind you, some people still want to have a little space between them and their neighbors, but the idea of just kind of having community connection and attachment and being part of something greater than just your home is what a lot of people are looking for. And so this is an image of the way that we used to build cities and towns. This is mixed use. There's the village center there with the town green in the middle. You have mixed use buildings around it, people living above shops. There's a civic building with the church there on the green space. And you kind of head out of the downtown and it starts becoming more residential and smaller lots. But as you move further up the hill, it gets to be larger lots, houses set back, big, and it's sort of gradual progression. And when you explain it that way, you go like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But somehow, over the years, we completely just lost that knowledge, right? We said, oh my gosh, we have these cars. This is amazing. Let's drive, right? And so we just designed places for that purpose. And we could get around here. They didn't have the option. But unfortunately, once we made that choice, we lost so much of the quality of life and the connection to community and all of that. So this is what people used to do before zoning decided it needed to separate all of their uses. And so diagrammatically on the top image of the image there, that's what it was, connected network of streets and all of the different uses intermingled. On the lower part of the image, you see all those pods, and each pod leads to the collector road, and you can't get them from one place to the next. So when we're thinking about designing places today, as many of you mentioned in there, the idea of being more walkable, the idea of having that mix of uses, being more compact, so you can actually preserve and conserve, areas of nature, rather than, thinking that, if you have a really big yard with grass and lawn, that somehow that's preserving something because it's not too dense. And then the idea of diversity of housing types. Gets you, people at different stages of life, different income levels, different backgrounds, and the place becomes more interesting and more authentic and more resilient over time as well. Because a lot of the places that struggle are those that are sort of built in more modern times when, it's all, there's a place near us in Franklin, Brentwood, you may have heard of Brentwood, and they pride themselves on 1 acre zoning. We're a 1 acre community, and it's a lovely place and very expensive place to live. But, as those preferences change and as, the ebb and flow of the economy happens or whatever, those kind of places can be in trouble sometimes if they're not strong enough to resist. So how do we take some of these things when we're talking about zoning, things like the character that I mentioned, or we heard some people say the small town charm and all that. How do you take that and turn that into zoning, which normally seems very ho-hum and devoid of character? So we do what we call character-based zoning. Some people call it form-based, but we find that character-based is a little easier to understand the idea of character. So we focus on character first instead of the uses. You can do a number of things. You can protect some of the most beloved parts of the city, and that's usually something that everyone can agree on. We can enhance areas that need improvement. We heard some of that in the workshop a minute ago. Improve this area, improve that area. We can start to create more predictable outcomes. One of the things that scares people the most about development is not knowing what to expect. Am I going to hate it? Or is it going to be great? I don't know. Depends on the developer. Depends on how they go through the zoning process or whatever. And this is something we see everywhere. Y'all may not have that problem here, but most places do. And so we can make more predictable outcomes. We want to look to create something for everyone. That goes back to those different stages of life and the housing types, et cetera. And then having a balance of transportation modes by being more walkable and bikeable. You aren't as dependent on the car, and you can be transit ready as well. Then we can enhance the economic viability of the community, by making a place more desirable. Obviously, it's more resilient over time, and it can help with the economics. And then working on making it easier to use and administer than the zoning currently is. So I mentioned going out and measuring and documenting, and we've done that so we can understand what is the DNA of the community, so that we're not just importing what we did in the next town over or in New York or wherever else we've done zoning. We want to make sure it's of this place. And then we want to start to try to figure out and sort of define what is small town charm. What does that mean? What does that look like? And this is a road. It's actually in the back, just past the silo on the bottom of the hill is my neighborhood. So this is a road in Franklin, and I call this like the quintessential rural road that might take you to some great little town. And so, I just throw some of these images in, and you may go, no, that's not small town charm. That doesn't resonate with me. And that's part of what we're doing this week is trying to understand that. This place, I can't believe that's a real place. It looks like a postcard, except for the power lines. So it says Atlanta Homes on there. That must be around here. This small town charm thing is, I know y'all don't have Spanish moss either, but ignore that. It's the hardest thing because we work in a lot of places that are concerned about that, and it's meaningful to them and part of their identity, but it is something that is very hard to codify, and everyone struggles to define what it means. So that'll be a good challenge for us. So the way that we think about zoning is like I described in that image of that cute little village with the church on the village green, and we think about it as a continuum of different types of character, and this is diagrammatically how it lays out from sort of nature at the left-hand side, character district 1, moving into rural areas where you've got farm, agriculture, whatever. And then the third character district we call suburban, sub-urban, not suburban. And that's sort of, primarily, nearly exclusively single-family residential, larger lots, big setbacks, whatever. Then getting into the fourth district, you start having some attached, so townhouses, row houses, corner store, like convenience kind of a thing. Neighborhood centers, like y'all described in some of the discussion a minute ago. And then into the fifth, where it gets much more urban. And then some places have a sixth, and I think you guys actually call for a sixth in your comprehensive plan. A lot of times we calibrate this so that, like, let's say 6 represents Atlanta, right? Or we calibrate it so that 6 is your most urbane place. So we can talk about how we, do we add that? And then sometimes special district for things like the airport or whatever. But for the purposes of what we're doing, with this scope of work, we're really focusing on areas that you want to have character, special character, more of, probably the infill areas and those kinds of things, rather than worrying about like a special district for the airport. But if you've not seen, this is what some of these character areas look like. This is nature, CD1. And this is a rural character. This is actually here somewhere. This is sort of suburban. This is in my neighborhood, a little sort of neighborhood center in the 4th character district. And then your 5 or 6, however we define it, in downtown. And we'll have some unique things in the zoning that helps to define all of these things. So we'll talk about frontage types, which is how the building meets the street and how you experience it as a pedestrian. And that's the kind of thing you don't find in a typical use-based zoning ordinance. We will, and then we'll talk about civic space types. So rather than just saying open space, a development needs to have open space, we'll say parks and plazas, and very, very specific with standards for them, and each one is appropriate in a different character district, and so you wouldn't want necessarily to have a plaza civic space type in a on a farm, right? A plaza doesn't go on a farm necessarily. We have building types as well, and this is how we start to incorporate that mix of housing that we're looking for. And so, here some single-family detached houses and some duplexes and cottage courts and bungalow courts and row houses, little tiny houses, micro houses, some apartment houses, a little bit bigger apartments there, some live work. Can incorporate that where people are living above a shop. And the thing about it is that all of these different housing types, because character is what is being focused on with the zoning, can be compatible together. So we just heard, in discussion a minute ago about the idea of not just separating the different housing types, mixing them in the way that you would in a real neighborhood historically. And so we're able to do that by looking at the character of things and incorporating standards for that. However, the use of a building is also still important to some degree, right? So don't get me wrong, we will still have uses in the ordinance. It just goes from being like the first most important thing to like the sixth most important thing maybe. We'll look at thoroughfare standards, so street types. Obviously what happens on the private lot is massively important for the character, what's actually built, but also the character of the street, right, is very important. So imagine if you had that beautiful country road that I showed you running right down here. What if that was your Broad Street, North Broad, right? Is it Broad? Yeah. Imagine if that was Broad Street. That would be a little weird, right? It's kind of a disconnect. So the character of a road has a lot to do with how you experience the place, and so we want to make sure that that is all synced up as well. And so I mentioned earlier that making it easier to use. If you've ever spent much time looking at a zoning ordinance, they're usually pretty dry. They're usually not something you want to spend much time looking at. So we work really hard to try to make sure that it's very graphical, very easy to understand at a glance, so that not only can staff interpret it, but also an owner, a property owner, or even just a homeowner. Like, they don't even have to be a developer, but they just want to see what they can do. So we want to make that simple in that way. So schedule, we are here with the E underneath. So we are her E, Codeapalooza, starting now. So we had our kickoff, community kickoff last month. And so what we're going to be doing while we're here for the next few days is setting up our open studio space where my team and I will be working, and we'll be drafting code language and sketching on things to illustrate ideas for how the zoning concepts and things that y'all shared with us could actually look and be implemented on the ground. And not that what we're going to sketch is what has to happen, but then you can go like, oh, that's neat. That's okay. I see what you mean now by that. Or that's a bit much. That's too that's not Monroe, right? Because we'll have our renderer do renderings as well. So have artist renderings and things. We have different topical meetings starting on Thursday. There's one at noon talking about walkable streets. We have another one at 5:30 for downtown and infill. On Friday, we have one at noon for greenfield development. And on Saturday, there's the work in progress presentation. We're going to take all the stuff that we do while we're here and share it. And then, as we always do, get feedback and let y'all, tell us what you think. And, normally when we do it the other way around, we do the presentation and the workshop. But so here's what that'll look like. Some topical meetings, hopefully will be well attended. And then we'll be designing and working. So at the end of the day, though, we need to make sure that what we're doing is something that works for you all. As I said, it can't just be some cut and paste kind of a thing. It needs to work for the policymakers, it needs to work for the community, it needs to work for businesses and for people of all ages, as well as visitors. Y'all are a place where people want to come visit sometimes. That's really good. So we need to make sure we keep that going too. Works for developers as well. But we got to make sure that, most importantly, and this is really what the community's primary job is, to help make sure that we capture the essence of Monroe, that you hold us accountable for that, you provide feedback that allows us to know things about the place that we can't as outsiders, that only you all can know. And so that's going to be important. So that's the end of the presentation. Oh, no. Come on, no. So now we chat. All right. So any thoughts, any concerns, hopes, fears, aspirations, beyond what you said in the mapping, obviously? I mean, how about this? I'll do an icebreaker. I have a question for y'all. How do y'all know all this stuff about planning? I felt like y'all were all like as tables of planners presenting all your work over there. I mean, y'all spend a lot of time talking about planning here, I guess. Yeah, that helps. Yeah. So y'all, I mean, are we like, we're looking for, you want to protect downtown, the historic areas? That sounds like a good idea, right? Okay. When we, y'all talked about transforming some of these areas around, like, how far are we talking about going with that transformation? Yeah. Everybody put the red dots in the same spot, basically. Yeah. And we'll overlay all those, so we'll see the pattern. So that'll be good. Mm. Yeah. Okay. Got it. Yeah.
This side of town, that side of town, and you can't really, the walkability, which I don't know where all the money came from, but they've started that process on the north side of town and I guess the west side of town for the sidewalks on Spring Street.
Yeah.
But the East Spring and South Broad are still kind of where, South Broad, for example, there's a lot of housing down there, but the sidewalks they're not as pretty as the ones on North Broad.
Right, they didn't
So,
carry as far.
yeah, they didn't carry as far. So, but yeah, I think just connecting the city, and then I know with what we talked about is just coming up with more like, obviously downtown brings people together, but recreation brings people together too. Mm-hmm. And I would love to see, more recreation type stuff, basketball courts, walking trails, bicycle trails, things of that nature. So
The thing that I mentioned about what we've heard about some of the new development being kind of cookie cutter, and we've heard that a lot of the national builders are kind of coming in, sort of doing their sort of standard thing. Does that ring true? Is everybody? And it's kind of an interesting situation, right? So if we're writing zoning where we're really focused on capturing the essence of the community, right, and what is your character here, when somebody is working and sort of doing something that's formulaic, right, that they do everywhere, it's difficult to incorporate that character, and get that. It's not, in some ways, again, working for developers sometimes, I mean, I understand where they're coming from, right? They spend a lot of time creating their kit of parts, if you will, right? And so a lot of places we work are worried about sort of the pace at which they're growing. They want to sort of keep up with it and curtail it and be smart about it. And one of the things that I always tell people is the way to really make sure that your growth isn't just out of control is to have standards, right? Because what you'll end up doing is having a certain, it shrinks the pool, right, of people who are just like, aha, there's land there, aha, I'll take that, ooh, you know. But on the other hand, you have to think about, you know, like, are you in a position as a community, you know, economically, where you can make those choices, that you aren't just, we'll take whatever we can get. I'm encouraged, though, that I've been hearing about some sort of creative and clever things that people have been doing, some unique little pockets of development here and there. And I think that a lot of times when people start seeing those kinds of things, and when they're successful, people go like, oh, okay, Monroe's a place where you can do something different, because we're working on one of our private projects. It's in Florida, and they've got these national builders in it, and they said, you know, we built more homes in Celebration, Florida, so like this mixed-use sort of walkable neighborhood that Disney did several years ago. We've built more homes in Celebration than anybody else. I said, oh, that's great. There's a bunch of good-looking things in Celebration, and they said, well, this isn't the Orlando market. We pull from the other book, the other book of plans. And I said, oh man, that's unfortunate. So sometimes it's really just, you know, helping developers get the confidence in the market, and that y'all are heading in that direction. And then it takes a minute too for people to realize that, like, no, you're serious about standards and how you want to do it. So growing pains a little bit. So we've heard y'all have had some pushback, I think, on de-cookie cuttering things a bit around here. So. Lots of nods. Yes, sir. Oh, we got the mic coming to you.
I would point to 3 projects in town that have happened in the past. I don't know exactly, but let's just say 5 years that they weren't developed per a form-based code, but it's the type of projects that a form-based code would help produce, if that makes sense. And so I'm sure all the locals are familiar with, and this is not as much whether you shop at these places or use these places or not. What I'm talking about is the form of the building itself. And so one of them would be John's Supermarket. I mean, I think that's an excellent project. And again, in terms of course, it's a great store too, but in terms of the form of the building, it meets the street. It's 2 stories. There's apartments upstairs. It's all brick. You know, I don't know. John's Supermarket is an excellent example of what a form-based code would help produce. A second example would be the former Silver Queen building that's going to be La Gabrielle's. Previously, it was the building that was on the back of the lot, and it was built to the front of the lot. So that would be a second good example. The other one would be the One Street project, which are the apartments in front of the Walton Mill on South Broad Street. It's apartments, which people typically are scared of that word, but in my opinion, it's a very quality, good-looking project. Houses nice people. It fronts both streets. It occupies a corner, and it, you know, it's not a dead ringer of the mill, obviously, but it's very well done and very well detailed for the project that it is. So I don't know. I just want to try to help everybody maybe visualize what a form-based code helps produce. And in my opinion, those are 3 great examples of that.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. Yeah, I'm looking forward. We were supposed to tour today, and so I'm looking forward to being able to get out there tomorrow and lay my eyes on some of the new things y'all have done since we were here last. But and you know, the other thing, those are, it sounds like examples of more some of the more urbane manifestations of form-based, but you also, with the form-based code, can have, you know, single-family neighborhoods too. And so that's one of the things to think about, you know, as you have these, you know, looks like there's a good bit of land around still, right? And so even a national builder can come in and, you know, follow the general rules without having to change their product type, they call it, you know, too much housing. You may want them to, but at a minimum, the code will get you where you need to be, where the buildings are sitting on the lot right and parking's in the right spot and all of those kind of things. But that's why I love the character-based approach, because you really can, whatever the context is, whatever it is you're trying to create, whatever the experience that the developer is looking for or that you all are looking for, you can accommodate that. I always say too that we don't like to admit it, but you can, with a form-based code, codify like the bad stuff that people would not like to see in these images, you know. So it's in some ways it's used shorthand for creating cute, walkable, good mixed-use places, but it's really a zoning strategy that lends itself to that in a way that normal use-based zoning doesn't. And so we've had places where they say, well, we want to do form-based, but we can't do it everywhere because everywhere doesn't want to be form-based. And I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, it doesn't, we can't just have everything be nice and cute and walkable. I said, oh, don't worry about that. But what we're looking at, again, in our scope of work this time around is really focusing on those areas that I think do want to be that. And then, you can assess the merits of form-based through this effort and decide whether or not you think it's worthwhile to do it citywide or whatever, because in some ways there's a good benefit of not having two different scenarios, these zoning scenarios, certainly from staff's perspective of like, okay, I got to put on my suburban sprawl hat or I got to put on my form-based hat, whatever. So
in town who actually wanted to do what you pictured with the cul-de-sacs and all the lots backing up. It's just a specific type of neighborhood, and I explained to him, we're lucky to have some very, very smart people that work with us. But I said, we have one chance to get it right, so we might get kickback from builders. It's just too bad. We just have to be able to stand firm, and I'm the mayor, and I worry that potentially council may give in, and we just have to stand firm. It's too important to do the right thing, and that's why you're here.
yeah, well, yeah, we come in from the outside as an impartial third party to help y'all sort it all out. And the thing that's interesting to me is that the data is in. Like, this whole form-based approach has been going on now for 20, 30 years. And you can see that new development that implements these strategies, even if the city's zoning doesn't currently allow it, they have to go through some PUD process or fight tooth and nail, which is funny that that's also what happens in a lot of places. But they outperform the other conventional developments. So, they have faster absorption rates, so they're selling faster. They have, higher cost per square foot, and yield and all that. And what we end up actually worrying about is how do we keep some level of affordability because it's so desirable. And most places, you only have a few developers who are willing to kind of go out on a limb and do something different. So that you have a small supply of it, right? If everyone did it and had to do it, as you just said, then it becomes less rare and prices start to normalize. But I mean, even in Franklin, where I live, we have an amazing example of one of these new walkable mixed-use neighborhoods that has housing of all types, and it's been wildly successful. I mean, even during the recession, everybody else had tumbleweeds blowing around their foundations of houses that were started and not finished, and they were selling 3 or 4 houses a month and just kept on going. I've literally had the conversation before with a developer, and I was like, well, hey, if you take a mixed-use approach, like, you can do the commercial that you wanted to do, and then you also have the stuff above that you can then also make money on. They said, I'm a commercial guy, or I'm a residential guy, or, yeah, I know, but I don't have that many years left to keep doing this. I don't want to have to rethink all of this stuff, you know. And it's literally like sometimes even if the economic incentive is there, they see they can make more money, they'll just say, no thanks. So the first sort of baseline thing you have to do is make sure that at a minimum, the thing you want is the easiest thing to do. That's baseline. And then the next level of seriousness is to make sure that it's the only thing, right? Some places say, well, let's just make it the easiest thing, and we don't want to make it the only thing. Other places say, we want to make it the only thing because we're all in and we believe this. And we work in so many places that are built out. I mean, they say, we're built out. And you wouldn't believe the missed opportunities. Even simple stuff like just our transportation network. They're like, oh my God, we have all this traffic on these 2 roads. And I was like, yeah, that's because none of the other roads connect. Like if you had, oh no, well what if the city bought that house at the end of that cul-de-sac and punched the road through and connected or whatever, and then the neighbor's like, no, thank you. We bought on this cul-de-sac for a reason, that, you know, all that stuff. And so, and even like in Franklin, they have, you're required to connect to the development next to you. Like they've realized a long time ago connectivity is a good thing. Well, neighborhood 1 goes in and they stub up, they build a street to this property line, and they even put up a sign that says future connection. And that sits there for 5 or 10 years or so. And then the next folks come in to build in there, and oh my God. And next thing you know, city council's like, I know we said we were supposed to connect and all that, but do we really? They're like, can you just do like a trail, just a pedestrian connection? And I was like, well, it's better than nothing, but it's not going to help your traffic problem. You've just made it worse now. So it is frustrating to see how many times we get called in after the fact. And so when you do have a community that you're working in that isn't built out, you do see that, you only have one chance to do it right, kind of thought process. So, yes?
I just wanted to mention in this process, I think one of the things that is kind of hard is when you see all the pretty pictures of what you like, it looks real expensive. And it looks real like rich and hoity-toity. That's what we've heard back. We've done this before. And for a lot of our community, it also feels like that doesn't look like me and my neighborhood or us. And so in the process, I just want us to be mindful that, or help people understand that it's not what we're trying to do. That's not the goal. The goal is not to change the economic character of our town. And so, but I think that's really, really important for our city as a whole, and for a lot of people that might not be in the room tonight, maybe they're online, but just realizing we're not trying to make everything look like what is in the pictures. We're trying to make it look like us and all of us. So I think that's really important, and hopefully we'll get more engagement and I'll tell people, and hopefully we'll get more people, because I think that is probably a fear or a concern when you start seeing the pretty pictures.
Yeah,
because that doesn't look pretty to everybody.
Yeah,
looks scary to some. Yeah,
it's a great point. And one of the things that's interesting in the types of pictures that you put in a presentation like this, you could nearly find the same exact picture in a place where you've seen disinvestment, right? And it's like, oh shoot, and then if it was disinvested and reinvested in, and all of a sudden the people who were there have had to move out because it's too expensive and all of that. One of the things that we've had the opportunity to work on different projects where we've got communities that are really struggling. And we're working in one community. It's called, it's a funny name, it's called Hard Bargain. It's a historic community, and there's literally a historic marker that says Hard Bargain. And I think it had something to do with when they were trying to buy the property. But it's a historically black community, and it's right, it's like 4 blocks. And, less than half a mile away, they're multi-million-dollar mansions. And people had come in to help the neighborhood, and, people had come in and done habitat houses there, Habitat for Humanity. And when we came a few years later, we did a charrette process, a palooza, and we just, hey, what are you all looking for? And, housing for people, of course, and whatever. And we said, well, how about those habitat houses? And they're like, oh, don't even get me started. I was like, what do you mean? Well, first of all, a lot of them have had to be torn down already. I said, what? No, they just didn't build them good or whatever. And I was like, I hadn't heard that about habitat houses before. And they said, but the biggest problem we had is they didn't fit in the neighborhood. It was just the standard thing, and they got the low-pitched roof so the volunteers don't fall to their death and all of that stuff. And in our neighborhood, even though the houses need paint or the porch is crooked or whatever, it's historic architecture, and we want new houses that meet the needs but feel like they are part of the neighborhood. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. And I think even more so, the groups that were working to help revitalize the neighborhood were like, wow, okay, it's not just about just providing housing. And then they also were, they didn't have any neighborhood center. So there was no commercial uses. There was no barber shop or nowhere to, get some food or whatever. There was, it's too small for a grocery store, but there was luckily a grocery store close enough so they weren't in a food desert. And so we showed how they could put some little live work buildings and have some, the barber shop and the restaurants and whatnot. So, but the long and the short of it is that while it's easy and nice to show the pretty pictures, the zoning doesn't care about how nice it is. It's going to set those standards in place and get the buildings in the right spot and make sure that sort of the, overall composition of a building will fit in and those sorts of things. One of the things that I think is neat about this place is your heritage and history of being this sort of mill town, and you've got the old mill housing and all of that, and who would have ever thought all those years ago that there would be these cute cottages that people want to fix up and move in and all of that stuff. And I noticed in the comprehensive plan that one of your areas was the industrial up to the northeast, that sort of, and there was a big empty piece of land next to it. And I haven't seen if there's any plans for that yet, but we've been designing and drawing a lot of these, what we call them industrial villages, where the idea is like you would have large-scale industrial users and you have housing and a neighborhood center and all that close enough for them to walk right to it. And so those are some of the kind of neat things that we can incorporate so that it is more reasonably priced in it, because it's so close to industrial, which a lot of people wouldn't think was great. If you work there, you might think it's great. But it's a place that feels like a real community. And so some of those kind of things we'll start to look at as we work through the next few days. Anybody else?
For mine. Can you speak to, can you speak to, Brian, for everybody, the different stakeholders? So you got policymakers here, you got staff, you got builders, developers, and then you have just community residents. This concept of if the city goes sort of all in, sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater and leave an old Euclidean zoning code, the existing zoning ordinance that we have, and go to a form-based code, sort of expectations of the growing pains, the transition of what that feels like, and how come fall that they leave sort of what they've always known, and then here's a form-based code, and how they adapt to that.
That's a good question. And most of the time what we see is there will be a couple of people who have just been waiting for this opportunity, like, oh, this is going to be great. It's not going to be hard now, because even though like in my neighborhood that I was describing earlier, this walkable mixed-use neighborhood, and if we're redoing the zoning in my town in Franklin, and through the process, we're like, what's your favorite development? West Haven. Hands down. And then sort of the second to that was Berry Farm, and it's also a walkable mixed-use neighborhood that's, not quite as neat as West Haven, but still way better than most places. And everyone loves that, right? But it was the most difficult thing to do for them when they set about to create it. The market study that they commissioned by this big deal firm out of Chicago said, oh, there's no market for this sort of mixed use walkable stuff. Nobody wants an alley, whatever. That's, and the developer was just like, I think this is really cool. I'm going to do it anyway. And they were right. But even still today, when we redid the zoning ordinance, it still wasn't the simplest thing to do. So many places are focused on protecting against the lowest common denominator of development. And so when you set the bar low, it's difficult to allow for something exceptional. Now, what we see is that you'll hear a lot of complaining. Oh man, I don't, this is, we don't believe this is going to work or whatever. But again, it's the same developer will often do the thing elsewhere. And so it's just a matter of like testing. It's like, I hate to use a pop culture reference, but if you've seen Jurassic Park, like the Velociraptor was trying to figure out, could they get out of the enclosure, and they sort of test and see if the fence is going to give at some point, and finally they find the way out. And so there will always be complaining and, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And so one of the things that you can do is provide them some case studies and say, look, this is working elsewhere. It's more profitable. It's better, whatever. And people will come around. But a lot of times it's really just a mindset. Like we're working one community right now, and we did the zoning, and then they had us come on board to help them do review for development submittals. And you wouldn't believe it. For some people, we're the devil. And for others, they're like, oh, thank heavens you're here. This is so much better than the way it used to be. And it's the ones who are excited about it and are trying to comply versus those who are just trying to do what they've always done. And so that's kind of what you will see. But what we've seen with our municipal projects and with our private development clients, if they've identified this as a place they want to be, it's usually not like, well, we're just sort of, it's marginal, right? It's like the numbers are there, the data is there, and they'll do what you ask them to do as long as they realize that that is what's required. So yeah, does that answer? 8:03. I'm more glad that I'm here and not sitting in the airport still. But yeah, I'm really excited. It's neat to be back after all these years and tackle this. And I was looking at some of the old sketches we did, little planning ideas, and I was like, okay, cool. I think this time we can zoom in on some of those areas and in more detail and kind of look at it more closely. And I think that you all have spent the last several years wisely, it looks like, in that you have increased your knowledge about these things. And we're, so many places we go, they're just like, what? Walkable, Paul's over here talking about ped sheds a minute ago, all that. It's like, that's normally like the planner jargon that we say. For anyone who doesn't know a ped shed, that's a pedestrian shed, usually a quarter of a mile or 5-minute walk from a meaningful center to the edge. And so planners use that to plan things that are human scaled. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, and I really do. If you've got people who are normally, skeptical or difficult or whatever, like make sure they come. Like that makes this interesting for me. I love that, and also too, people who are, as you said a minute ago, maybe not thinking that those images are super cool or whatever, or they're not focused on cutesy, charming stuff, but they still care about character of their neighborhood and all that. Want to make sure as many people as we can are able to participate. But the good news is that even though we try to make it much more of a sophisticated and nuanced approach to zoning, zoning still is somewhat crude in what it can and can't do. And so more than anything, we just want to make sure that we've heard from everybody and everyone feels heard as well, so no one feels excluded from the process is key for us as well. So, any restaurants still open? Can I still get food at 8 o'clock at night? This isn't maybe by 9 I'm on shaky ground. I don't know. So. All right. Well, thank you all. Appreciate y'all's time and interest and flexibility and swapping it around. Thank you to Katie for sorting it out and getting y'all going on the workshop. Come back. We've got our meetings, technical meetings coming up. Get your schedule if you don't have one on the way out, and see you tomorrow.